don't intend to share it with our large network, but just some of the folks closer to us, or if we want to use or pull any quotes for us for any reason, but we're not planning on sharing it widespread, and we can always shut it off when we start the discussion. So thank you folks for coming. I'm really excited to share this trip with you. And I'm just going to go over a little bit of the text before I go into it. So if everybody who's not speaking, anyone who's not talking right now, if you could mute, or even if we could just mute everybody, I think that would be fine. So this is a little bit different than some of the other presentations we usually do. So we're gonna save all the questions to the end just so we can get through all the material. And definitely if you don't want to forget your question and you want to put it in the chat, but I do encourage you at the end to have it more, we want it to be more discussion based after we're done presenting. So feel free to voice your question out loud and share your webcam like we usually do. So I will just say that someone will be managing the chat. So if you want to put your question there, then that would be great. And we can ask all of the questions at the end. So my name is Danielle for people that don't know me, but I probably know most of you. I'm going to be presenting with Kim Coburn, who's the green coffee buyer at Equal Exchange, which is really exciting. And James Hayes-Bohanan, who is my professor, but also a part of this network and the reason that I have this job. So I'm really excited to present with these two very knowledgeable people. And yeah, so we'll get started. So this is just the first slide here, and it's a picture of us in the coffee mill at in Chiapas in Mexico. So this is, so we can go to the next slide. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the agenda as well. So first, we're going to basically talk about my experience in Nicaragua, which is really special. So it's been 10 years since I took my first delegation to coffee lands, and 10 years later, I now work at Equal Exchange and have gone on a delegation with Equal Exchange as a worker owner. So I'm going to start talking about that, and then let James talk about some of the work that he's doing and how we became connected. And then we will kind of get into our trip, and it will kind of go through the process of coffee kind of from seed to cup. And then I'll talk a little bit about an interesting experience that I had as part of International Women's Day. I was part of a women's march in San Cristobal de las Casas. And so James is going to talk a little bit about the history of that movement as well. So this is a picture of me 10 years ago, exactly, actually, picking coffee in Nicaragua. And I went on a trip. I went to Bridgewater State, which is a college that is a little bit, maybe like a few miles away from Equal Exchange's headquarters in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. And so I went on a delegation, and the point of the delegation was basically a deeper understanding of coffee supply chains and the different systems and certification platforms that are used. So it was a fair trade coffee farm. We compared to a Rainforest Alliance Starbucks farm that we went to. And then lastly, we also went to an Equal Exchange farm and an Allegra farm that was, I believe that was a Whole Foods specialty blend called Selva Negra. But I'm going to let James kind of just talk about how we're connected and a little bit about the history of the trips that have been going on at Bridgewater for many years.
Okay, thank you very much, Danielle. I'm the big guy in the photos there with Danielle. In 2006, I took my first travel course to Nicaragua, and it was Virginia at Equal Exchange who helped me make the connection with a small cooperative in the community of La Corona in Matagalpa, Nicaragua. The fair trade premiums that each local cooperative gathers, the penny a pound premium, gets invested in local projects, and this community, along with some neighboring communities, had decided to try agro-ecotourism as a way to diversify their local economy and spread news about or learning about coffee. And they did this in cooperation with Lutheran World Relief. And so Virginia at Equal Exchange connected me to the Lutheran World Relief people who were helping the folks out there, and allowed me to do my first travel course in 2006, and then again in 2007. We took 2008 off. I went back in 2009. And so then by the time Danielle came, was on my fourth travel course to Nicaragua. And it was just, it's something I intended to do one time, but I fell in love with the people of Nicaragua and with these cooperatives. And I've been back now almost every year since then through 2018, when the political situation in Nicaragua precluded us from going back. But while we were there, the people in the community, in the cooperative Seco Cafen, helped me to organize a travel course. And Pam Hayes-Bohanan, who's on the call with me, has been on 3 of these. She was on the original one in 2006. And we tried to put together a trip that would show us several different aspects of coffee, both the whole process from seed to cup, which Danielle's demonstrating there, picking the coffee, and then we're cupping coffee at the end. That might have been the first time I visited a real coffee shop in what I would call a real specialty coffee shop in Nicaragua, because they didn't exist during our first few trips. And so we were able to see the seed to cup process, but also to visit small farms involved in cooperatives, the kind of fair trade cooperative that's the basic model for a lot of equal exchange coffee, and then also some larger farms that we saw for a variety of reasons. One of which is that one of the Selva Negra farm has rainforest practices, and also has a lot of really good practices, and happens to have a hotel lodges as part of the farm. So it was a convenient place to go as well. And so I've been doing that program now for a lot of years. And Danielle had actually been in my semester-long class that I teach at Bridgewater, a second-year seminar. And so she had already been learning quite a bit, and I think she might have been the first student to take the travel class who had already had the semester class. And so it was really nice to have somebody who was already interested and knowledgeable about coffee on the trip with me. And the upper right corner there is not coffee, that is cacao. And I have been hoping to do the kind of massage of the fermenting cacao, and Danielle was the only student who would let me get close to anywhere near her with the cacao stuff on my hands.
I wanted to just add a little bit about the connection that James and I have that I think is really significant to this conversation. So I actually started taking his coffee class about literally actually 10 years ago, because it was in 2010 that I went on the trip, 2009 that I first took the class. I actually worked for Starbucks at the time, and all that I knew about coffee was what they told me. And, I thought I knew all these sorts of things about coffee, and I took this class thinking I was going to learn about espresso or something. And I'm like, oh, I'm Italian, I like espresso, this will be cool. And I realized it was like the deep political injustices surrounding coffee, and was like, wow, I don't feel great about working for this company, and I wanted to learn more. And so then I took the delegation to learn more. So I just think that is really special, but there's many other reasons why James is the reason that I'm here, quite besides metaphorically for getting me interested in the subject, but quite literally, he sent me the job description for this job. So for many reasons, he's the reason that I'm here. So I also thought it was special to include him in part of this presentation because of that reason as well. So thank you, James, for being many of the reasons while we're here, but maybe we'll move on, and then we'll definitely circle back and talk more about the connection, unless you have one more thing to say before I go to the next slide.
Well, I'll just say that I'm really honored and delighted to be part of this, because I have been to Mexico. Pam and I used to live in Mexico and near Mexico. I don't know how many times I've been in Mexico, but I've never been to a coffee farm there, and I've never been to Chiapas, because all my visits to Mexico were before all of my visits to coffee lands. So I'm really I've been teaching and reading about Chiapas for years, but I've never been there, and I'm really delighted to get a little bit closer view of it.
Awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about Equal Exchange's model, just to kind of warm us up for talking about coffee. So I think it's interesting, all the people that we have here. We have James as a citizen consumer. I work at Equal Exchange as a worker owner and basically manage our citizen consumer community, which is all of you. And then Kim works directly with producers. So I think the conversation and all the presenters we have today is a really diverse group who has kind of all of the perspectives of different parts of the supply chain. So I think it will be great. Thank you for attending. So I think Equal Exchange really is doing this alternative model. And it's really interesting for me to think about my experience 10 years ago as a student and just seeing an Equal Exchange farm versus a Starbucks farm versus a Whole Foods farm, and like kind of that was like what piqued my interest. And I was really fascinated by Equal Exchange's model, and not just the work that they were doing on the producer level, but also that they're organized as a democratic cooperative, worker-owned cooperative. So it's really cool to be a part of that cooperative and understand more of the inner workings of that. I kind of knew it from the outside. There's many challenges that I didn't anticipate. And so I think also relevant to the era that we're in right now with COVID-19, and really how this model is kind of an advantage for us right now, because we do have those direct relationships. Like, to me, our supply chain, it's all about relationships. My relationship to you as someone who's organizing the citizen consumer community, Kim, who's organizing our producer partners and forming deep relationships with them directly, and the worker owners having a relationship to each other and to all of those parts, and basically connecting all of those. So I think when we think about all the challenges that we're seeing in the grocery stores and things being off of the shelf, it actually is a real advantage for us to have more control of our supply chain because we have those direct connections. But I don't know if Kim has anything to maybe turn it over to Kim if she has anything to add about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure that most of us have seen this slide or a version of it. But one of the most important differences to note is that, as you can imagine, with the supply chain on the bottom, you know, if you can't see it super clearly, there's more dots, you know, at the most basic. But the product is becoming more expensive as it transitions after every transaction, and the farmer hasn't made more money. So that's something to keep in mind, right? Because with our supply chain, there are much fewer transactions, but we have much more control. And as Danielle was saying, this directness of our supply chain is really benefiting us now. We're obviously all at home, probably because of COVID. We probably would be here at home anyway because it's 7. But since there are less steps in our model, that means that while each of these steps is experiencing some sort of delay or hurdle, we're receiving it that much faster because there are fewer hands for it to transition through. And so, of course, it's also creating a more direct relationship with the model, and we're able to connect with the producers, ask what's going on, and change our process to ensure that we're getting the product.
And I will just add one more thing that we are working on as part of the citizen consumer community, which is even more of a direct connection. You just can't get any more direct connection to the farmers, is some of the work that we've been doing with buying clubs. So if you haven't heard about that or you want to hear more, definitely if one of my coworkers could throw all of our emails in the chat, that would be great. And I think that work is really meaningful here as well, in a way that you can kind of tap directly into the network. We have this era right now where Amazon, Instacart, all of these like direct delivery to your house, and really placing all of our eggs in that basket. But when you have a corporation that's sole purpose is really profit, that's going to be where their energy goes. And to be a part of a different type of a model, I think, is really meaningful in this era. So we can go to that next.
So we're going to speak a little bit about Comun. We'll give, Danielle will take us through her actual trip, and then I'm here to ground us in Comun and how much are we buying and how many co-ops do we work with to provide some initial information. So their actual name, Comunidad, means in English, all of us think. And they're a really great example of what people can achieve when they come together and devote their minds to a common cause. They are a relatively small organization. They're about 160 producer members. And so in our coffee supply chain, we are working with cooperatives that have 70 members at the smallest, and so that's in Bolivia, to 40,000 in Ethiopia. So Comun is pretty small compared to, in the range. And we are currently working with 29 cooperatives in 11 countries and three continents. So Comun is one of these, but they're a really kind of star child because they have been they're relatively small, but their quality has been exceptional over the last 5 or so years. And they're really responsive. They're just really quick, and they don't have any internet access where they are, but somehow they're always very available. And it's really impressive. Some stats just for Coffee Team from Equal from 2019. So in 2019, we imported 8.6 million pounds of coffee, and that came via 206 containers. Our total purchases were 18.3 million. And of that, kind of how James had mentioned the fair trade premium, so of that 18.3 million, 1.7 were fair trade premiums paid to the cooperative. So as James mentioned, the co-ops get to democratically decide how to use these funds. Specifically for Comun, over the last 5 years, we've been purchasing 4 containers. You might hear Comun, you might hear Comunidad, or you might hear CYN. They're all the same. We will be just speaking about this particular co-op in Chiapas. So over the last 5 years, we've been consistently purchasing 4 containers every year. So that's about 168,000 pounds of coffee. And in total, they're producing 7 containers of coffee, and that's 292,000 pounds roughly. On average, we're paying $2.50 per pound. And each container is worth around $105,000. So our total annual purchases just for this one co-op are about $420,000, which is really impressive as we learn more about the region. It's very remote, and so to think that Just Equal Exchange is able to flow that much money to a cooperative to do good and really ensure that there are sustainable coffee practices is really wonderful. On our buying side, we try not to think of just the purchase because the purchase is just a transaction. And so we like to think about total economic engagement. That's not really a word we throw around too much. It's just a word that some of the people on the coffee team are talking about. So other components of this engagement would be providing financing or facilitating financing with organizations, providing grant monies, small grants. And in that same vein, Comun is also involved in a 5-year development project that's funded through USAID, and it's called Cooperative Development Program, also CDP. And you can find out more information about that on our website. And that project is focusing on governance, capitalization, quality, and productivity. And then gender and youth are cross-cutting themes. So Comun has been really focused on this governance piece because they have been in a situation where they have to rotate their board every 2 years. And they've been saying, every time someone really gets going and understands how the board works, they have to switch. So that's one of the various things that they are currently working on. And the last thing I'll mention about with Comun is that we work with 3 cooperatives in the Chiapas area that are all in the buffer zone of El Triunfo. And in this buffer zone, there are a lot of migratory and non-migratory species. They say that it's, not a scientist, but they say that it's actually where South America and Central American biodiversity converge in this cloud forest. So you can find a lot of plant life that you can't find elsewhere. And the biosphere is segmented into 5 regions. Danielle's going to share a little bit more about our really exciting and strenuous hike into Region 1. And we ended up camping there. But over the last 5 years, the co-op has built an ecotourism arm, also how you were mentioning, James, with the other co-op in Nicaragua. And they've had a lot of success leading birding tours, mostly foreigners who come and they want to see various birds. And Biosphere 1 is called Biosfera Quetzal. We didn't see a quetzal, but we were really hoping for it.
We did see a ton of pictures and videos of quetzals, though.
Yeah, that's true. Can we go to the next slide, Em? Perfect. So farm quality and management is an incredibly important aspect for a co-op. And as you can expect, you know, with 160 farmers that are all very dispersed, it's a really big job for their agronomists. Each step in, you know, the process is affecting the ultimate coffee quality. So you're thinking about things like climate, topography, variety, nurseries, space, shading, maintenance. And coffee is as good as it will ever be when it's harvested. I like to think that from there, each process is really going to be taking quality away, because ideally you have the best, you know, the best soil, the best plant, and then you have great roasting, right? That really, you know, showcases the flavor. Climate, variety, and spacing are really big factors that came to play when Roya or coffee leaf rust decimated a lot of the crops in Central America and South America. In Central America, it hit more in 2012, and then in Peru, it was 2013. And a majority of the co-ops in this region, Comun included, they're really rebounding from Roya. So last year was probably the first year that we saw contracts were fully completed. Before that, there was a lot of co-ops that were still defaulting. And a lot of governments were pushing certain hybrid varieties that didn't ultimately have good cup quality. So then when the buyers came to buy the product, they didn't love what they were tasting. And it's really tricky with Roya, because varieties that are resistant to Roya are likely then they're susceptible to other pests and diseases. So it's really about finding a balance based on the climate and the region, and then the ultimate cup quality. Comun is engaged in a program that Equal has been leading with another co-op in Guatemala named Manos Campesinas. So these 3 co-ops in Chiapas have been going. We've been traveling with them to Guatemala, and then cupping a variety of the coffee varieties that are in Guatemala. Chiapas is very close to Guatemala, and so a lot of the varieties that they have tried to plant have been similar. So over the course of a week, we cup various varieties, and then we see how they react in cup. And it's been fascinating to work as a team and learn more about certain varieties that maybe governments really were trying to push, but ultimately didn't have good cup quality. In the actual photo, there's a man in burgundy towards the left, and he was one of our guides. His name is Jose Luis. He was explaining that this particular area has been experiencing droughts over the last 2 years. And so one of the experiments that Comun has been playing with is learning more about natural processing. So Danielle will get into it a bit more. But what he said is that because they didn't have enough water to actually process and ferment the coffee, he took some of his coffee cherries, put them to the side, let them dry in the sun, and then cupped it. And apparently it came out quite good. And so now this year, Comun is experimenting to see if it's feasible to do more natural processing at the co-op level. Oh, we can go to the next one. Regenerative ag. So we also call this microorganism work. These blue buckets smell horrible, and they are filled with a variety of rock matter. They're filled with sawdust, corn husks, and they also use whey. And they mix. Comun had started doing this work with a Dutch NGO called Solidaridad. And so they begin by collecting local materials, as the ones I just mentioned, and then they combine it with the whey, and then they find virgin forest, which has microorganisms, which are the billions of bacteria and fungi and yeast, and then mix those together, and it creates kind of like a kefir for the plant, like a super organic fertilizer for the plant. And Comun has done this really successfully. And you can see our guide here again, Jose Luis, he's on the left. And so he's standing in front of the compost that they're ready to bag up and then give to all of the different producer members. And on the right-hand side, what they have is a variety of different fertilizers or inputs. So you can go and say, you know, my plant has really bad yellow leaves, and bring a sample, and then the person there can suggest what you could use. The type of microorganism work is taking place throughout our supply chain. And it's in large part due to a very progressive Honduran cooperative named COMSA. So their methodology is based on what we call the 5 M's. It's what they call it, but now we have adopted it as well. The 5 M's, and that includes organic material, the microorganisms, the minerals, living molecules, and gray matter. And gray matter is just your brain power. And so this is the foundation that a lot of our cooperatives are using. And we actually have facilitated using some of our small grants to send different agronomists or producer members to take the 2-week course with this co-op. But it's really great that you can see this regenerative ag and microorganism work taking place kind of independently, and then everyone knows each other, and they all kind of create this really important network of learning from each other. Next slide, please. So here's Todd. He's the director of purchasing, and he is smelling the microorganisms. And so it says on the actual blue bucket that it is microorganisms from the montaña. So that's the virgin forest matter, creating the bokashi. And it says that it's, I'm going to increase the photo. So suero, so that's whey. So it's the solidified microorganism. The smell is pungent, almost like a cotija cheese. That's what I would explain it as. We can go to the next slide.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kim. So I'm glad that I have Kim here to ground in some of the more technical parts of coffee, just so that you folks can learn. I'm not as great with that. So just expect the human experience from me, an average person kind of traveling to these places, and how it kind of changed my perspective. And obviously someone still familiar with this and how it works, and having been to coffee lands in Nicaragua 10 years ago. So these are going to be kind of just like fun things and things that surprised me. So this is Teton. He is the dog of the host family that I stayed with, and he is enjoying some coffee. He was helping us pick. And this picture is really special to me. I always see these kind of pictures and I'm like, oh, it's like a bit stereotypical, and like, you know, that was like kind of my view, and I was like, I don't know if I want to like take a picture with me and my like hands in the coffee. And it was interesting, like the host Emilio that had me stay was like, no, like get your hands in the coffee, like I want people to know that like you were there and like you had your hands in it, and for them to understand that. And so he actually encouraged me to take this picture, which I just, the way he described it was really cool. So that's a picture of me in my very minuscule amount of coffee that I was able to pick. Folks who do this for a living are like infinitely faster, and I'll talk more about that as we go to the next one. So if you were a coffee farmer, you'd maybe start your day super early, like 6 a.m., work until maybe like 2, or depending on like how much, if you wanted to do it later, depending if that was like either your farm or if you were maybe someone local or another family member kind of helping out with the harvest, kind of all hands on deck at that time. So when we were there, it was like towards the end of the harvest. We happened to be picking at a farm that you were able to kind of just walk to it. That's not always common. Like so it could take anywhere from like a half an hour to 4 hours to actually get to your farm. And so that's like a huge range. I think this was kind of for the simplicity of us, we're visiting and we only have a limited amount of time. It was just easier to kind of be in a location where the farmer lived very close to their farm. So we were able to walk there in, 10 or 15 minutes. And even though I know that coffee grows like on a mountainside, and it's different when you're actually picking it. So I think we still can kind of think, oh, it's going to be in like a bunch of rows and we're just like picking. Like, no, it is on the side of mountains, and like you take a wrong step and you could like tumble down this mountain. And that was like something I really felt like it was hard. Like I felt like I was going to fall, like how, like just like you're hanging off of the edge really. And so it was very hard work. And so here's a picture of Emilio, and he is, measuring the fruits of our labor quite literally and laughing about it. So that one that he's doing is my particular It doesn't even reach half of like the smallest amount. So yeah, that was embarrassing. And the next one, someone else had just like tons of like leaves and like sticks and stuff in their bag, and he was kind of joking, but it would be quite serious if that was, you know, if you were doing this. And he was like, you know, points deducted, right? Like you'd be reprimanded if you had like, or maybe get less money if you had maybe all these leaves and debris kind of in your bag. And then this is just an up close picture of the coffee cherry. So once you he pours the coffee into that bucket, and then it kind of goes into like this bigger vat, and then down to the water processing. So we can go to that next slide. Great. So this is the washed process. So where it kind of comes out of that little chute and then goes into this basically giant barrel to go through a water process. I would maybe Kim, if you want to say a little bit more about the wash process, but I know that this is how this particular community does it. They do it on site. Potentially other communities might have a shared wash process that they do that isn't on their site and that they share with other folks near them.
Sure, yeah. So the photo that we see right now is the beginning of a wash fermentation process. So at Comun, each farmer is doing this wash process individually and then turning it into the community once they have the coffee cherry, like the husk actually off the bean that we know. So each farmer is doing this on their own. The beans are pulped from their skin, so it's ideally red. We have some green ones, but that piece is taken off, and then it's just the part that we know, but very pale and has still mucilage and parchment on it. So then after that, the beans are rinsed in running water, and they're kind of set in these cement tanks. And that can be anywhere from 15 to 30 hours. The pro for doing it on farm with each farmer individually is that the farmers don't have to pay for additional transportation when the coffee is still very, very heavy because it has all of that cherry on it. The con is that each farmer might do it differently, and so there's not a lot of consistency.
Can go to the next slide. And yeah, this is just a picture of kind of where it ends up. Just wanted you folks to see that. Great. So this is a picture of a kind of natural process. So Kim was talking about that earlier. It's actually not the greatest example of this. So it's something that they're still beginning to experiment with. And these, as you can see in the picture on the left, there's like tons of green beans. So this is more as kind of an experiment and for like local consumption. And you know, buying it at a cheaper price. So this was actually the patio of Emilio, who I stayed with up here on the left, just right on his patio. And then the picture to the right is kind of a larger area where there's more of a shared a drying process of the coffee. So I would say like it's definitely more of a popular way of processing coffee in Ethiopia, but I think that folks are learning that on the consumer demand side, it's something that folks are interested in, having it be naturally processed. It's basically kept in the cherries and dried in the skin, so it gives it a really ripe fruit flavor. Kim could probably explain it better than me, but I know that I love Ethiopian coffee. I really like that flavor, so I'm excited that Latin America is going to be doing more of it, and so I'm interested in personally trying more of it.
That's perfect, Danielle. Yeah, a lot of co-ops and communities are turning to natural processing more out of necessity, because as they experiment with, or as they experience more drought, it's an alternative, because the wash process, which is most of the coffees that we know, and for example, thinking about Equal Exchange's coffee, all of our coffees except for our Ethiopian are washed, and you need a lot of water for the wash process. So now we're going to talk a little bit about quality control and what it looks like at Comun. So this photo is taken from Comun's warehouse. And so this is where Comun receives the coffee from the various producer members from all of the different communities. They weigh it, they determine what certifications it has. Maybe it's fair trade, maybe it's organic, maybe it's neither. And then they take a sample for their in-house cupper. So they make sure that there's no rocks or debris, which would then increase the weight and the amount that they're paid. And then the green beans are stored here until they get to the shared mill, La Union, which they share with the two other cooperatives in this area. An interesting conversation happening in the coffee world right now is a full lot or a micro lot. And this came up during our conversation at Quality Control, because as we were kind of weaving through those piles of coffee, there was a smaller amount, and they said this was a micro lot for a very specific buyer. And so we were talking with the delegation, what does that mean? So a full lot is 41,800 pounds, 41,800 pounds, call it 42. So that's a full container. And then a micro lot could be anything from a couple bags to a couple thousand pounds. And it's typically either from a specific farmer or from a cooperative. And what people are looking for when they're buying micro lots are a certain point, and we'll get into what cupping is right after this. It's in the next photo. And that's an important distinction, because when we think about that, you know, a lot of the cooperatives ask equal exchange, oh, will you buy a micro lot? And we've become really adamant in that our answer is no, because what we're trying to do with equal exchange is really amplify the voice of an entire community. We're trying to increase the entire quality of a cooperative and a community, whereas a micro lot isn't doing that. It's focusing and maybe getting more money to a specific farmer, but in the long term is not providing a sustainable alternative for a community. And so we have been investing in quality over the long term, but as you can imagine, to increase the points or the quality of an entire container of coffee, that's, call it 20 different producers worth. And so that's a lot of investment for the agronomist, you know, to get that coffee up to snuff.
And just to speak about that, Kim, because I think that's super interesting, but just from like the consumer side, sorry to cut you off, but I was just thinking about that, like, we're talking like you go into a fancy hipster coffee shop where someone's like pouring you, you know, a little pour over, they're you know, doing it super dramatically maybe, right? And like, oh, this is like, you know, from this particular village. And while that can be really cool and you'll hear a lot about direct trade, I think what we're trying to do here is really like this whole model of alternative development and building long-term relationships with community. And it's really about elevating the entire community, right? And not just one farmer who maybe has, you know, like his coffee score is an 87 or something like that. So he's going to be capturing all that income, but what happens to everybody else in that area? And how can we think about the entire community as a whole and elevating really everyone?
There's a saying in Spanish that I heard from one of the GMs in a co-op in Peru, and they said it's like sucking the best parts of meat off the bone. Yeah, which I thought, I was like, that really encapsulates it.
Do you want to go?
So yes, please. Yeah, we'll go to the next one, cupping. Yeah, so here we are, the whole delegation, cupping 3 different kinds of coffees from Comun. So for those of you who might not know, cupping is how coffee is scored, similar to when you go into a wine shop and you see 92 on the wine bottle from Wine Spectator. It's the same kind of idea. So specialty coffee has to be above an 80 on a point scale of 0 to 100, just like wine. And there's actually a link. I will link it. There's a blog post about coffee cupping. So you grade the coffee across multiple categories that would include aroma, taste, cleanliness, balance, and then like taster's cup. So Comun's cupper is this really incredible woman named Alejandra. You can't see her in the photo. She's off to the left. But she has been the cupper for the last 10 years. And so once she gets the quality sample from the warehouse, from the photo that we saw previously, she cups it, and then she gives that information back to that team, so that with every producer, there's, you know, a bunch of information, their first drop off, what the volume was, what certifications, what that point score was, and how much they were paid and when. So Comun had this interesting quality initiative that we learned about while we were there. It's more like a quality incentive to create healthy competition between all of the different members. So the bottom 3 scores, the bottom 3 cupping scores, receive deductions off their price. So they get penalized for having the poorest scoring coffee. And that money goes directly to the top 3 scoring coffees. And so I don't know, we didn't learn who these producers were, but she said it with a smile on their face. It's not a huge sum being deducted, but it's enough to keep people really aiming to get the best cup of coffee. And Ale she's been participating in a lot of different quality programs with Equal Exchange. And as mentioned, she's also the cupper that travels with us to Guatemala. And at times she's actually also the cupper that cups for the other 2 co-ops in the region.
I will just add, during this cupping too, we tried 3 different coffees. And so there was a bit of a trick question in here where one of the coffees was actually from the year before. And I always think this is funny too, like what you think you might taste or something being subjective. And, you know, to me, this is like about really being present and like trying to taste and smell the coffee. And I also found it really interesting that the quality control cupper from Equal Exchange was there as well. And so just like being a fly on the wall, like, oh, we do it for this amount of time, we do it for this amount of time, and just seeing the differences in how folks cup, but really like as peers, it felt like to me, like just kind of chatting back and forth on this is what I do, this is what I do. So I was really impressed with just their whole operation and how they really did focus on quality, because we're, you know, not necessarily emphasizing micro lots, the quality is still something that's very important to this group, and you could see that and taste it. So. Okay, so now this is just the fun part. This is like their community. This picture on the right is just like the whole group kind of like who's going with which family and like what level of Spanish. And so Kim decided to challenge me and another woman, Gabrielle, and put us in like a totally Spanish speaking situation. And so it was good because it challenged me to like only speak Spanish. And so that was really fun. That was really fun for me. I had spoken Spanish much better in a past, in my, well, pretty distant past, it feels like at this point. I can't believe it's been 10 years since I've been to Nicaragua, but I guess it has. So if you could go to the next slide. I'm going to probably go through some of these fast because I do want to leave time for people to ask questions. I just threw in the picture of, this is actually Kim on the left, and she has a really cool hat that she's made with Equal Exchange's logo. And so that's actually a picture of us in the back of a car. Like the whole group is actually driving like many hours up crazy dirt roads, but this one particular picture is us driving through a river. And at first I thought it was a joke, but no, we actually did drive in this rickety truck like through a river because the bridge was there was construction on the bridge, supposedly. I didn't really see anyone doing anything, but apparently there was. So we kind of drove through this river, and I was like, okay, this is gonna be fun. And so I would say the word of the day for this was rama, which means branch. And so we were like driving through these like tiny dirt roads and branches, right? Just everywhere above. And so like the person in the front's job was to be like, Rama, and like you'd have to like duck so that you wouldn't get like, you know, slapped in the face with a Rama. So that was funny. And then just this picture on the right, I was just really impressed by a lot of the other things that Comun was doing. And like James and Kim had mentioned, like, what do people do with that extra money in fair trade? How do they use it to kind of elevate the community? They basically were doing a few things, and Kim probably can add in as we go along here, but some of the things that they were doing were dormitories. Most of the time, because of the biosphere, there's people who were here who are bird watchers, so we were kind of the exception to that group. They were really excited to have us there as a partner of Equal Exchange. Another thing is that they're not totally reliant on Equal Exchange. That's never something that we want to do. I'd say like maybe 60% of what they are getting is from us, and that's just to provide resilience for the cooperative, having them diversify where their income sources are. If anything, God forbid, happen equal exchange, which I know it won't because of all you wonderful folks, but say anything did, you know, that they do have another source of income. So that's just the reason for that. And so the dormitory is another way that they get income. So having bird watchers who kind of have like specialized permission to kind of come in this really space where there's not a ton of human activity in the biosphere. And so they're kind of staying in this dormitory. So you go to the next slide. There was also a restaurant. Oh, I think the other way. But there was also a restaurant that they had opened, which was absolutely delicious. And so that was just like for passerbys or mostly people from the cooperatives to kind of come and just eat at the restaurant. So this right here is my host family, who is just so wonderful, and glad that I was only able to speak Spanish with them because it just felt like a different kind of connection that we were able to have. So this like picture on the left is just the view that they have every single day just coming out. It is absolutely beautiful. Every time you look at that sky, the clouds are just as beautiful in a totally different way, even if it's raining. So it was, I'm a photographer, so a lot of these pictures, I think actually maybe all the pictures are mine except for maybe one or two. But yeah, I just was taking pictures of everything here. And so this picture on the right is Sonia Flores, and she is making homemade tortillas on something that her grandmother gave to her as a little press. So you can kind of see her doing that. She's made it with flour, a mixture of flour and corn, and she's kind of pressing it there and then cooking it on top of this little stove. So this is outside. And so their house is actually set up in a really cool way where like there was this main patio area that was the view, and then like everything kind of had a door to the outside except for the main house with the bedrooms. So that was really cool. The bottom one is a picture of us drinking tequila. So I simply asked a question about mezcal. I'm like, oh, what do you think about mezcal? Like what's like a good place? They're like, brings out the bottle, and like, you know, that was the end of that. So we were drinking mezcal. If you can, and we're also enjoying some equal exchange dates. So that was something that Kim had an idea about that might be interesting that folks in that area may have never tried, just to share a different supply chain and a story that we had translated into Spanish with folks there. So if you can go to the next slide, I have like a bigger picture. So this is Sonia Flores, and she is adorable. And I just thought we were just laughing so hard about how she was drinking mezcal out of a Minnie Mouse cup. It was like a kid's cup, and it was probably my favorite thing. And also I thought it was cute that we had a conversation about how they call each other gordita and gordito. And I was like, if you were in America and you called your husband like little cute fat thing, like that would be bad, right? That would be insulting. And they're like, no, it's a term of endearment. Like, we're not offended, we love it. And so I thought that was really cute. And we also talked another thing that I'd never heard of, which is about like people's names there. And so like his name was like Emilio Martin, and hers was Sonia Flores, but kind of like depending on who it was that was addressing you, they actually use their middle name for like folks that are like closer with them. So even though to us he was maybe Emilio Martin because we just met him, well, we were Martin, he was Martin by the end, but in the beginning we're still, you know, being formal. But most of the people in the community called him Martin, and that was it. So I that was interesting and different for me. So if you could go to the next slide. Cool. And then this is just, I don't know, this is just me being a geek about their little coffee thing that they gave me. They also made this, I don't know where I can find it, but if Kim, you know, anywhere in Boston that has any of that like sweet bread that they have in the afternoon, like maybe like 3 or 4, it's kind of this sweet bread. It's like unlike anything I've ever had. It's like a piece of bread, but it's like softer and like it's like not so sweet, but just a little sweet. So that was absolutely delicious. And this is another picture of Teton, and then my coworker Gabrielle and Emilio kind of watching the sunset there. Teton kind of followed us everywhere. He was our little mascot, and he was adorable. And on this bottom right, so another thing about this day is so even though actually we had learned that this community had just gotten internet a few days before, which was really exciting, it was kind of a new thing, and no one who was there connected to it. But it was like Super Tuesday. So for me, I'm like, what is going on with the election? And so I was like, so they were like, what do you want to watch on TV? So I guess, we had kind of like the sweetbread, and then, watching TV just before dinner. And I was like, if you wanted to turn on the election, like that would be great. So it was actually a really cool experience for them to kind of watch like the election and like the different states. And they were like asking who I wanted to win. And that's a different conversation for another time. But I thought that was a really fun experience. And something I don't have a picture of, but I do just want to share that as like kind of like part of my favorite experience that happened on the trip was sitting down and having dinner with them. We didn't take any pictures. It was like a really intimate conversation. And in my broken Spanish, actually tried to describe the citizen consumer community and the initiative and what I'm doing and this organizing work. And I'll just say that I have trouble with it in English. So doing it in Spanish was actually quite hilarious. But there was something about, they just were able to understand it. And it was really cool because they just got it. And they were like, yes, like that is why you're here. Like you need to tell people. And like, just, it sounds like a simple thing, but just the way that Emilio said it was like just put his hands out like this. And like, he had like this like coffee cup in his hand. We were of course drinking coffee again, even though it's 8 o'clock. And he was like, I want people like Danielle, like when you go back, I want people to hold my coffee in their hand and I want them to feel like where it came from. And I want you to like tell that story. And so I thought that was really cool. But yeah, if you want to go to the next slide. Okay, Kim is probably going to be able to describe a little. Kim, should we go our ridiculous hiking story first, or do you want to talk a little bit about the biosphere and then we'll say it after?
Start with the hike, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so when you go for a hike in Latin America, in every sense of every different country that I've been, when someone tells you you're going for a hike, like you are going for a hike. It's not a joke. It's not like they'll tell you a certain amount of hours. It's like not real. Don't believe them. Just like prepare yourself for like the absolute probably hardest hike you've ever done. And so like, oh, we were like, oh, it's just a little hike like down like to the little encampment. And it was like I'm an avid hiker. I hike all the time. The hike in was no problem for me. It was pretty moderate. But I mean, some people who maybe, we had a smoker on the hike. There was maybe someone who hiked, but like more simple hikes. And so even that people found challenging. So some people kind of stayed back and didn't do like the second hike. So we did 2 hikes that day. So we all kind of passed out, took a nap, and then went at it again after lunch. And so we're like, oh yeah, we're just going to go for a little hike. It's, 2 or 3 hours, like back and forth, like, it's hard. So they did kind of say that it was hard, which made me nervous because they didn't say the one before was hard. And some people were like, all right, like I'm tapped out after that. So it was probably like, for anyone that does rock climbing, like a vertical scramble for about 3 hours. And every like so often like, oh, we're almost there, like 15 more minutes or, whatever. And meanwhile, along the way, we're like hiking and, he's like, oh, everybody stop, and we're like, oh, geez, like what's going on? So he like stops and he's like, oh yeah, it's like, this poisonous snake that like, you could die. I'm like, oh, what would happen? Like, if someone, you got bit by the snake, and I'd be like, oh yeah, you'd like die in 2 hours. I'm like, okay, great. So he just was able to like see it somehow. He like knew exactly where it was and like, was able to stop us and tell us. And so we're going a little bit further and we kind of see like this little like print. I like smell something, like, I don't know. I felt like such a nature person. Not that I but I was like, what is that smell? And they're like, oh, it's wild boar. And I'm like, what? Like it was this huge print, like giant. And I was like, all right, wild boars, poisonous snakes, we're good. But we're like going up a little bit further and seeing another print. I'm like, all right, like what's this one? And we had like run into maybe the like kind of, what would you call him, Kim? Like the expert, the bird expert. He was like a ranger, right?
Park ranger.
So we ran into the park ranger, and he's just kind of up and down. I don't know how, he must be in the best shape of his life, because he's just up and down that thing all day long. And so he's just like sitting there, and like they're talking in Spanish, and like, you know, I've been speaking Spanish at this point because I had no choice the past few days. So I'm like, are they gonna say this in English? Like, they've been talking for a while about like all these animals, and so it was a jaguar print, and so that was funny. So I mean, long story short, we're 3 hours, and it was supposed to be either 3 or 4 hours. We like did it pretty quickly, and at one point every single person on that hike was like ready to give up and just like, I am going back down, this is ridiculous, like you said 15 minutes, it's been 45, like I am done with this hike. And we all like just like made it to the top. Like it felt like some sort of miracle, but there was something really special about that experience, and like doing it with our guides, with Jose Luis, who had been kind of like our tour guide the whole time, his son, the daughter, and like it felt like a family hike. And you know, it doesn't matter what language you speak, that was just like this like shared experience of like conquering this like mountain together. And so I think that was like something that really kind of connected us. So that was really special to me. But Kim can talk to you more about maybe the significance of like that area, because it really was like this kind of untouched place that really just specialty like birders would go to. And so to be there, it really felt like a special experience.
I'll make it quick so we have enough time for Q&A. So we went with 2 guides that are also part of the ecotourism arm from Comunidad. And so in our defense, I've only been to Biosfera number 3. I hadn't been to number 1, so I had no expectation for this hike. I just thought it was, you know, what the guide said. So so as I mentioned, the biosphere is segmented into 5 different regions. 2 of these regions have lodging or campsites. So the one that most people go to is number 3. And these campsites were actually people's homes. And if James has a moment to talk about the Zapatista movement, people were actually pushed out of their homes. And then the park rangers, and also there are women who, for example, if groups go up, typically there are women who will also go up and cook for the groups. These are all family members of the initial families that were forced out. And sometimes actually there was even, we were told by women last time that their parents were murdered, and to repay, the government to repay them, gave them jobs for life going back to this place that used to be their home. So it's a very crazy, tumultuous background. But our park ranger is very invested. He was very invested in this space. He showed us probably an hour and a half worth of Quetzal photos. So this area, the one that we ended up going to, it was region number 1, is known for their Quetzals. We were a little bit earlier than when the Quetzals would have been there, but apparently he saw a pair earlier in the day, and we didn't actually see them. It's also worth mentioning that sustainably shade-grown coffee in a buffer zone, like in Comunidad situation, is really important because it creates a transition between the agricultural spaces and these protected areas. So as you hike into the biosphere, you will see a bunch of different posters that say, you know, you're exiting stage 1, you're entering stage 2. And so these different areas are where there should be more rigorous protection. And so ideally, if done well, these kind of buffer zones can help protect biodiversity, prevent deforestation, and hunting around these conservation areas.
I will also just want to point out that there is a mule with their head in the window right next to where we're cooking. So there's that. And the mule also did the hike, by the way. And so we can go to the next slide. So this is just something fun that I wanted to share quickly. It had absolutely nothing to do with the Equal Exchange trip. It was a total coincidence that I was here for this amazing International Women's Day. And so I'm going to share a little bit about my human experience, and then hopefully James can share a little bit more about the history of the Zapatista movement, which I'm more excited to learn about. But I just happened upon this women's march, and so basically it was International Women's Day, and I heard that this march was happening. I participated in a few different kind of like women activities, which I also didn't realize were in Spanish. So that was another interesting experience. But there were basically 2 different areas that the women were starting at. And so there were a bit of a divide in the movement that happened in San Cristobal, where One was kind of all-inclusive, LGBTQ, anyone could go, men were a part of it. And then there was another one that was like, no, like we don't want men, like we just want like women who've like suffered for many years. And they just had the kind of a different school of thought. But basically, it was interesting because I didn't know if there was going to be violence. I didn't know what was going to happen. It was just before COVID was happening. And, you know, so I'm going to this like giant gathering and like in this like little bubble in Mexico, having no idea what's going on back home, by the way. And so they basically started in two different places, but met up in the center. And it was so peaceful. It was beautiful. I was kind of on the sidelines, like not sure of like what my role might be as someone from the US. Like, am I welcome? Like, is this okay? And then this like woman, there were, you know, older women, like 90 years old, this indigenous woman kind of like, you know, pulled me into this march and was like, yo, vámonos. I'm like, all right, I'm in, like, this is happening. So it was a really great experience. And I can share more if anyone's interested in this artist, but I just thought she had absolute beautiful work. And the powerful is Somos Semilla, is we are seeds. And there's that Mexican proverb that I shared at the very beginning of the slide, at the beginning of the slideshow too. So if anyone wants to, I can share this presentation after if anyone's interested in it. But basically, I had gotten my hands on one of these posters. And so our hotel owner basically connected me with them, and she just gave me one. So I have that somewhere in my house. Just want to go to the next slide. And there was also a demonstration where they burned this, basically this is representative of the Mexican government. And there was like a demonstration where they burned that. But I'd love it if James could give us kind of a little bit more on like the history, which I'm still learning about, and I know he's much more knowledgeable than me. James.
Okay, thank you. This has been really wonderful. I want even more to get myself to Chiapas sometime. This has been really great, and I having this conversation over the last week or two with Danielle, I've been kind of going down various wormholes into things I've written and read before and seen, and reminding myself some of the things about Zapatista and this movement. And I'll just tell you a couple of the basics, and then on my sort of portal blog called Dr.Coffee, I have an article where I will link to some of the other resources, and people could go as far down this rabbit hole as they want. But I'll start with the name. Zapatista, the Mexican Revolution in 1910 to 20 was a land reform movement. It was the third major revolutionary movement in Mexico. The first was becoming independent from Spain. The second was overthrowing the domination of the church in politics. And then the third was trying to get control over the land. And so that was what the Mexican Revolution, which killed, I think, 1 million people, hundreds of thousands of people in Mexico between 1910 and 1920. And this is, a lot of this was on the U.S. border. So the U.S. was marginally involved by this, never really drawn into it. And so this is what we've heard of in the U.S. as revolutionaries. And one of the leaders of that was Emiliano Zapata. And so in the 1990s, so that revolution divided up a lot of big land holdings and distributed to smallholders. But in the case of indigenous communities, they gave these land holdings went to places called ejidos. And in theory, they were managed communally by indigenous people, but they became more and more marginal places, and they had less and less community control over them. And this became a big problem in a lot of parts of the more remote parts of Mexico, right? And in Chiapas and Oaxaca, it became particularly problematic. And by the 1990s, it was becoming very, very difficult for people to make a living. And so there was a movement, and they decided to name the movement for Zapata. So this is parallel to Nicaragua, where the revolutionary movement of the 70s, and even up to the present day in Nicaragua, is named for one of their earlier revolutionaries, Sandino, the Sandinistas. In Mexico, it's the Zapatistas. And the Zapatista movement is really associated with the face of it was a man named Subcomandante Marcos, who's not indigenous, he's not from the area, he's multilingual, university educated, always wore a mask, and he went by Subcomandante Marcos because he considered the indigenous communities to be the leaders of the revolution. Those were the comandantes, and he was below them. And this was also the first revolution to really get a lot of funding and support via the internet. 1994, they launched the revolution, and it ran through 1997. And there's a good movie, a good film called Connected by Coffee, shows the impact of that in this particular area of Chiapas, where the Octal massacre in December 1997 really ended U.S. support for the Mexican government in this, and led to the end of the war. So it lasted from 94 to 97, and about 30% of the combatants were women. And so it was, that's a very high percentage, and the armed conflict did end, but the underlying issues have not been totally resolved. And so it's pretty common in Latin America to have manifestations or marches or pilgrimages like the one Danielle fell into. I've fell into one in Brazil in 2003 and found myself accidentally at a march. And it's an interesting and important part of political culture in Latin America. But the conflict over land is really what's behind everything in Latin America. All the political movements have to do with this, and the importance of coffee and giving people, since their land is not being used for local food production, we have to find a way to make the remittances from coffee worthwhile and sustaining for people. So the coffee is really a life and death issue.
Thank you so much, James. We squeezed a lot of information here, so thank you everyone for being patient. I'm just going to say one thing to wrap up the women's movement and then wrap up this presentation and then open it up for questions. Thanks for being patient. It's just a bit longer than our usual presentations. But one thing I forgot to mention is that as part of Women's Day that I was really impressed by as well is that that following Monday, since Women's Day was on a Sunday, all the women actually weren't working. And so that was kind of an act of solidarity. And that's like something that obviously I don't think, as far as I know, is popular in the US. So I thought that was really interesting. And then I'll just say one more thing about the experience of what it felt like to just be in that march. And like, I've been an activist for a long time, but I've just never been a part of something that big or a protest that big before with that much energy. And it was just like a feeling that I had, and it's based in like no history that James has just explained. It's just something that I felt when I was walking, was this like strength that just felt like it had risen from like this deep pain. And I had just kind of like learned a little bit more about it when I left. And just like in Mexico, 10 women are murdered every day, 4 kids go missing. This is a place where people are still suffering and they are angry and they are doing something about it. And so to me, I was just like really impressed by the energy and like solidarity between women and different groups. So that I'll just say that. And then just to wrap up, thank you all so much for coming. And part of why we want to do this and we want to continue to do this more with this community is like, this is about human experiences, like along everything. Like I'm a human, I like do this work because I've had this personal experience with a teacher that, brought me to like this weird place that I'm talking to you now. And so I think on that level, like this is like humans behind equal exchange. It's humans who are at the farm and like telling me to like tell you like hold this cup of coffee and like understand where it's coming from. And like that's something that I really like took home and like really brought tears to my eyes, that I want people to understand as much as they can. And it's not them talking to you. It can't always be because of this unjust world that we live in. But if we can try to, continue to elevate voices in whatever form or whatever way we can, even if it's imperfect, like thank you guys for showing up and being a part of this. And I think with that, maybe we'll open it up for questions. So maybe we can stop